Okay, I'm considering this one a sound design hack just because of its versatility. There's so many different ways that you can approach using this next technique and applying it to different sounds to very either drastically change the way they sound in your mix or even just to add some subtle movement. But I think one of the most underutilized effects in Ableton's core library is the auto pan effect. And I'm going to throw it on this pad sound. Now let me just play you what I have here in this project. We got a drum loop. And we've got this very drony, kind of static pad sound. There's a little bit of movement to it, I suppose. But I want to add some more movement to it. Now, one thing I was kind of thinking here is maybe we could apply some sidechain compression to kind of duck the pad to the kick, because we've got this very straight 4-on-the-floor style kick drum. Now I could absolutely do that by grabbing a compressor, throwing it on, opening up the side panel, turn on the sidechain, do all the routing. I run into a couple of issues here though. One is the kick drum is sort of printed to this loop already, so all the other drum sounds are there, so it's going to be a little difficult to isolate the kick drum. I could go here to the EQ and maybe just low pass it, the sidechain key input for example, but that's a lot of work. The other thing, or the other issue I might run into, before I undo that there, the other issue I might run into is, let's say I do sidechain compress this from the drums track. If I ever down the line want to freeze this audio track, this pad track, well, check out what happens when I try to freeze it. I get this message that it can't be frozen because of the routing pad compressor. And the reason this is because that sidechain compressor on the track needs to have a constant real-time input in order to trigger the key input on the compressor and cause the ducking effect to take place. So this auto pan here, we're going to use this as sort of our workaround all in one. Now the auto pan, by default, what it's going to do, if we turn the amount up, it's going to simulate the signal panning from left channel to right channel. So as we play that back, you'll hear, let's turn up the amount some more. It sounds like the pad is panning from left to right. And we can adjust the rate, the speed of how that's happening, etc. We can sync it to tempo down here. But what we're going to do here is actually use the auto pan, because all it is just a volume LFO. We're going to use it as such, and we're going to simulate a sidechain compression effect from the kick drum up in this drum loop up here. So let's go back to the pad track. Let's unsolo it so when we play it back we'll hear everything together. And what we'll need to do on the auto pan here is, let's take the phase dial and we're going to turn it all the way down. Now this is just treating it as a mono volume LFO, meaning it's just going to give us one LFO signal that's going to modulate the volume of whatever audio is passing through this. Then what we'll do is we'll make sure it is synced to tempo, which it is right now, and let's set the rate to a quarter note because the kick drum is hitting every quarter note in this drum loop. And then we'll do a little creative manipulation of the LFO wave shape. Let's try a saw wave. And then let's go down here to this button that's labeled normal. We're going to click it and it's going to say invert, and that's reversing the phase of the saw wave. So if we play it back now, we're going to get a little bit more of a simulated sidechain compression sort of effect. And the cool thing about this is we can go down here to the shape dial, for example, and we can adjust the curve of that LFO. It's almost like we're messing with the attack and release time on a sidechain compressor to kind of sculpt how the volume is dipping away and then coming back in over time. And if we solo this, so let's just mute the drums track for a second. This sounds pretty good, but if you listen carefully, I have students complain about this all the time, that you get a little bit of a click at the end of each cycle of the saw wave here when it kind of jumps the volume back down to silence. And this is also a common thing that will happen with sidechain compression if we're just doing the routing through a sidechain compressor. So if you can live with it, this isn't that bad. You can kind of play around with the shape here. It's not going to totally fix it, but that'll alleviate it to some extent. But another thing we can try doing here is actually changing the LFO wave. Instead of a saw wave, let's try a sine wave, because that's going to give us a little bit more of a smooth movement. And then if we take the offset, which is going to offset the phase of this whole LFO wave shape we're dealing that, I found if you set the offset somewhere around 290 degrees, you'll get a nice smooth up-down movement with no clicking, because we're not having any abrupt linear straight up, straight down sort of gated volume changes happening. And if we play it with the drums, we can dial back the amount if we want to, still hear a little bit of the static pad blended in underneath. Think of the amount almost like the dry wet dial on the auto pan. Okay, so we can use the auto pan like so to simulate a sidechain compression effect. And obviously, this is only really going to work if you have a very steady drum pattern like we have here, this very steady kick drum that's hitting every quarter note. If you're doing something like house or techno, this is going to be really easy. If you're doing a little bit more of a complex, broken beat kind of drum pattern, then obviously this trick isn't going to work. But we can still use the auto pad to add some cool movement to stuff. So just this pad, for example, we can go with the default way things were kind of set up for us with the phase at 180 degrees, meaning we have two separate volume LFOs, one for the left channel and one for the right channel. As we slow it down, that becomes a little bit clearer here. You can see the left channel is this orange sine wave LFO, the right channel is represented by the yellow one. And as we play that back, obviously we can get a little bit of pan movement, but if we maybe turn off the tempo sync feature, speed it up and maybe dial the amount back, we can get just a nice subtle fluttering movement to this pad sound. I also find this to be really great on like electric piano and organ type sounds. If you're familiar with a Leslie rotary speaker, to kind of simulate the Leslie rotary speaker effect of this constantly modulating volume. So obviously, yeah, we can use it for these types of panning effects, but also if we turn off the tempo sync or turn it back on and we bring the phase back down, we can also, remembering that this is just a volume LFO, we can start to do things like maybe we'll go back to the saw wave, set it to normal mode, sync it to tempo, maybe to something like eighth notes. There we go. And we can just start creating interesting gate type effects to make this pad almost more pluckish. Let's maybe adjust the shape. Maybe speed it up to 16th notes. Oh, let's also take the offset. Let's bring that back to 0 degrees so we get something that's nice and in time. Let's try 16th notes. Now I've got this sort of gated pad effect instead of just a static droney pad sound. So think about using auto pan in these more creative ways. It's for more than just simply simulating a panning effect to your sound. But think about using it to kind of simulate sidechain compression or add gated motion to things like pads or other sustained sounds. I find this to be really cool on things like backing vocals, any sort of texture elements that are in the background of your track that you just want to add a little bit more rhythm or movement to. Autopan can be really great for that. So if you're not using this effect, check it out, dive a little deeper into it. It's quite powerful what just a simple LFO, volume LFO, can do to your sounds. So have fun with this one. Take care.